The night the sky fell. Nobody in the quiet village of Eldermere had ever seen a star fall. They twinkled, they shimmered, but they never moved, until the night the sky cracked like glass. It began with a single, trembling line of silver light splitting the heavens. Finn, a boy with restless curiosity, was the first to notice. While the village slept, he sat on his rooftop, watching the stars. He rubbed his eyes, thinking it was a trick of exhaustion, but the crack widened. A strange, low hum filled the air. Then, with a sound like 1,000 chimes shattering, the sky broke apart. Shards of glowing night rained down, casting everything in flickering hues of silver and indigo. Stars fell like raindrops, each one pulsing with warmth as they landed gently in the fields, on rooftops, in the river. Finn scrambled down, heart pounding, as the villagers woke to a world aglow with fallen constellations. An elder named Marla whispered in awe, "The sky is unraveling." Amid the scattered stars, a voice called to Finn, soft as the wind, distant as a memory. He followed it past the village and into the woods, where the largest shard of sky lay embedded in the earth, pulsing like a heart. As he stepped closer, it rippled like water, and a figure emerged, a girl draped in swirling, star-speckled light. "I am Astra," she said, her voice the echo of midnight. "And the sky has fallen because something was taken." Finn swallowed hard. What was stolen? She raised her hands, revealing a hollow where her heart should be. The moon's light. A cold dread settled in Finn's chest. Everyone in Eldermere knew the legend. The moon's glow was not just light. It was the force that held the heavens together. If it had been stolen, the sky would never mend. "I must return it before dawn," Astra said, "or night will never come again." Finn thought of the strange merchant who had passed through the village days before, selling bottles of liquid silver that never dimmed. "I think I know where it is." He led Astra back to Eldermere, where the villagers huddled in wonder and fear. At the center of town, the merchant stood smugly by his cart, his bottles glowing too brightly. Astra stepped forward, eyes blazing like galaxies. "You have stolen the moon's light," the merchant smirked. "I only took what I could reach." With a whisper of stardust, Astra lifted her hands. The stolen light trembled, then surged from the bottles, rushing back to her in a river of silver and white. The moment it touched her, she shone like the moon itself, and high above, the cracked sky began to repair. One by one, the stars lifted from the earth, returning home. The heavens mended, the deep night returned, and Astra, her task complete, turned to Finn. "Because you listened," she said, "the sky will always shine for you." She pressed a tiny star into his palm, warm, pulsing with quiet magic. Then, with a swirl of silver mist, she vanished into the night, returning to her rightful place among the stars. From that night on, Finn always kept the star she had given him, and whenever he looked up at the sky, he swore the stars flickered just a little brighter, as if whispering his name. And in Eldermere, they never forgot the night the sky fell. The end. The Boy Who Spoke to the Wind. In a quiet village nestled between rolling green hills and a dense, whispering forest, there lived a boy named Kyle. From the moment he could walk, Kyle was different. While other children played in the fields or helped their families, He would sit on the highest hill and listen to the wind. The villagers often whispered about him. "That boy speaks to the wind," they would say, shaking their heads. "A strange child indeed." But Kyle didn't mind. He could hear things no one else could. The rustling secrets of the trees, the laughter of distant storms, and the soft sighs of the evening breeze. And, most incredibly, the wind spoke back. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of fire and gold, Kyle climbed to his usual spot. The wind swirled around him, playful and warm. "Kyle," it whispered, "a storm is coming. A great one." Kyle's heart clenched. "How big?" he asked aloud. "Big enough to swallow the village whole." Kyle ran down the hill as fast as his legs would carry him. He burst into the village square, breathless. "A storm is coming," he cried. "We have to prepare." The villagers laughed. "Nonsense, boy! The sky is clear, and there's not a cloud in sight." Even the village elder, wise and respected, placed a gentle hand on Kyle's shoulder. "Storms do not speak, child." Kyle clenched his fists. "But the wind does." More laughter, disbelief, and, worst of all, dismissal. But Kyle knew the wind never lied. He had to save his village, even if they wouldn't listen. That night, while others slept peacefully in their cottages, Kyle worked. He tied down carts, reinforced roofs, and gathered supplies. The wind howled encouragement in his ears, gusting stronger as the hours passed. And then, just before dawn, the storm arrived. It roared like an angry beast, tearing through the village with unrelenting force. Trees bent and cracked, rooftops groaned, and rain lashed the earth in heavy sheets. The villagers woke in terror, running for shelter. But those who found safety did so because of Kyle's preparations. The carts he had secured did not turn into deadly projectiles. The roofs he had reinforced held strong. The supplies he had gathered kept them from starving when the storm lasted longer than expected. When the winds finally calmed and the sun rose on the wreckage, the villagers stood in awe. Their homes were damaged, but not destroyed. They had survived. And Kyle, standing on his hill, felt the wind brush against his cheek like a friend. The village elder approached him, eyes filled with wonder. "You truly spoke to the wind," he murmured. Kyle only smiled. From that day forward, no one doubted Kyle again. When he spoke, they listened, for they had learned that sometimes the wind carries wisdom, and only a few can hear its voice. The Enchanted Violin and the Song of Shadows. In the quiet town of Velmira, where cobblestone streets echoed with the melodies of street musicians, there lived a girl named Leora. She was the daughter of a humble violin maker, her hands skilled in shaping wood into instruments of unparalleled beauty. Yet, despite growing up surrounded by music, she had never played a single note herself. One autumn evening, while searching through the attic of her father's workshop, she stumbled upon an old violin case covered in dust. Inside lay an instrument unlike any she had seen before. Its wood was dark as midnight, its strings glimmering silver even in the dim light. The moment she touched it, a chill ran through her fingers, as if the instrument itself had been waiting. Curious and drawn by an unexplainable pull, she took it downstairs. That night, while the town lay still under the silver glow of the moon, she picked up the bow and played. The sound that emerged was unlike anything she had ever heard. Deep, haunting, filled with sorrow and longing. The melody curled through the air like smoke, winding out her window and drifting over the rooftops. Then, something strange happened. The candlelight flickered violently, shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, and the air grew thick with an eerie stillness. Leora gasped, stepping back as the darkness around her seemed to breathe. The next morning, Velmyra was different. People spoke in hushed voices of strange whispers in the wind, of flickering figures moving in empty alleys. Leora's father, upon seeing the violin, turned pale. "That instrument," he murmured, running his fingers over the strings. It was crafted by the sorcerer of Noctis. His music held magic, but it was dangerous. It was said that whoever played his final composition would summon the Song of Shadows. Leora swallowed hard. What happens if the song is played? Her father hesitated. It is a song unfinished. The one who completes it will awaken those who were lost. That night, despite her father's warnings, Leora could not resist the violin's call. She held it in her hands, felt the way it hummed beneath her fingers, and played once more. The melody poured out, rich with sorrow, aching and beautiful. And as the last note rang through the room, the shadows began to shift. They twisted like ink, rising from the floor, forming shapes, faces, figures of men and women in flowing cloaks, their eyes hollow yet filled with longing. One stepped forward, a man with dark hair and ember-like eyes. "You have awakened the song," he whispered. His voice was like wind through old leaves, barely there, yet carrying weight. Leora's breath caught in her throat. Who are you?" "We are the Forgotten," the man said, trapped in silence, waiting for one who could complete the melody and set us free. Her hands trembled on the violin. "And if I finish the song?" The man tilted his head, shadows shifting around him. "Then we will return to the stars, where we belong." Leora's heart pounded. She had the power to free them. Taking a deep breath, she played again, this time not letting fear guide her fingers, but compassion. She let the song fill with warmth, with longing, with hope. The shadows swayed with the notes, their edges softening, their faces growing clearer. They whispered their names, their stories, until one by one they faded, dissolving into threads of silver light that floated upward, vanishing into the night sky. As the final note rang out, the violin in Leora's hands changed. Its dark wood lightened to a rich, warm chestnut, the shimmer in its strings fading. The enchantment was gone. Its purpose was fulfilled. She cradled the violin close, her heart full. The Song of Shadows was no longer a song of sorrow. It was a song of freedom. And from that night on, whenever Leora played, her music no longer The Girl Who Stole the Moonlight. In a quiet valley where the nights were darker than ink, there lived a girl named Leora. No stars twinkled above her home, and no moonlight ever kissed the rooftops. The sky was nothing but an endless black sea. The elders said the moon had been stolen long ago by a sorcerer who hoarded its glow in a glass jar atop the tallest mountain. Leora, unlike the others in her village, could not accept this fate. She longed to see the world bathed in silver light, to dance in the glow of a full moon, to see her own reflection shimmer in the river at night. So, one evening, with only a lantern and a satchel of bread, she set off toward the distant peak. The journey was treacherous. The first obstacle was the Bridge of Whispers, an old wooden bridge suspended over a chasm so deep it seemed to swallow sound itself. As she stepped onto it, the planks murmured beneath her feet. The whispers grew louder, taking the shape of words. "Turn back, child. The moon belongs to the sorcerer. You will never leave the mountain." Leora clenched her fists and pressed forward, whispering back, "Then I will take it anyway." Past the bridge, she reached the forest of watching eyes. The trees loomed high, their twisted branches curling like fingers. Golden eyes blinked in the shadows, the sorcerer's ravens. They watched in eerie silence, waiting. Leora moved carefully, but as soon as she stepped on a fallen branch, crack! The ravens screeched and lunged. Thinking fast, she grabbed a handful of bread from her satchel and flung it into the air. The ravens, greedy for food, swarmed after the crumbs, their beady eyes momentarily distracted. Leora took the chance and ran. At last, she reached the peak. The sorcerer's tower was made of black stone, its door slightly ajar. Inside, at the center of a dimly lit chamber, stood the glass jar, and within it, the moonlight flickered like a captured star. Leora held her breath. She crept closer, her fingers brushing the cool glass. But before she could lift it, "Foolish child," the voice rumbled like thunder. The sorcerer stood in the doorway, cloaked in darkness, his silver eyes gleaming. "You think you can steal from me?" Leora's heart pounded, but she lifted her chin. "You stole it first. The night is empty without its glow. It belongs to the world, not to you." The sorcerer stepped forward, his hand outstretched. The shadows around him thickened like storm clouds, but Leora did not run. Instead, she lifted the jar and, before he could stop her, shattered it against the stone floor. Moonlight exploded into the room, flooding every corner with silver radiance. The sorcerer shrieked as the light wrapped around him, twisting his form until he dissolved into mist. The tower crumbled, but Leora stood unscathed. The moonlight, now free, soared into the sky, taking its rightful place among the stars. As Leora made her way back home, the villagers stood outside, faces upturned in awe. For the first time in generations, the valley was bathed in silver light. The river sparkled, rooftops glowed, and shadows stretched gently instead of swallowing everything whole. Leora smiled. The night was no longer empty. The Girl with the Silver Shadow. In a quiet village nestled between towering mountains, there lived a girl named Ilara, who was unlike any other. She cast no ordinary shadow. While the villagers' shadows stretched black against the ground, Ilara's was silver, shimmering like moonlight on water. From the moment she could walk, people whispered about her. Some called it a gift from the stars, others a curse from the old world. But Ilara knew only one thing. Her shadow was alive. It moved differently from her, lagging behind or twisting in ways that defied the sun's position. And, at times, she could swear it whispered to her. As she grew, the whispers in the village turned to fear. Shadows should be dark, they said. No good can come from one that glows. When crops failed, they blamed Ilara. When storms lingered, they muttered about the silver specter that followed her. One evening, heartbroken and weary, Ilara sat by the river's edge. Her shadow shimmered over the water, rippling like liquid silver. "Why are you different?" she asked it softly. The shadow flickered. Then, for the first time, it spoke aloud, its voice a gentle echo, like a song carried on the wind. "Because I am not just your shadow. I am your guardian." Ilara's breath caught. "Guardian," she whispered. "Yes," the shadow murmured. "Long ago, a great darkness threatened this valley. The stars granted me life to protect the one who would one day stand against it. That one is you, Elara." Before she could ask more, a chilling wind swept through the trees. The silver shadow stretched and twisted, forming shapes Elara had never seen before, warnings of something approaching. Then, from beyond the mountains, a deep rumbling began. The Nightmaw had awakened. The villagers had spoken of it in legends, a creature of endless darkness that swallowed light, leaving only fear behind. No torches, no fires, no stars could shine in its presence. It had been locked away for 100 years, but now it was free. A black fog rolled into the valley, smothering the village in shadows. Terrified cries echoed in the streets. Lanterns flickered out. The sky turned void black. But Elara's shadow glowed brighter than ever. "You are the only light left," it told her. With no time for fear, Elara stood tall and stepped forward. As the darkness lunged toward her, her silver shadow expanded, unfurling like wings. It wrapped around the village, pushing back the encroaching blackness. The Nightmaw howled, shrinking away from the light. With one final burst of silver radiance, Elara's shadow sealed the creature away once more, locking it deep beneath the mountains where it could never rise again. As the sky cleared and the village reawakened, the people stood in awed silence. No longer did they fear Elara's silver shadow, they honored it. From that day on, she was no longer just the girl with the strange shadow. She was the light keeper of the valley, the guardian against the darkness. And every night, when the moon shone high, her shadow would gleam like silver stardust, a reminder that even in the deepest dark, there is always light. The Hidden Kingdom Beneath the Waves. Once upon a time, in a world where the ocean stretched as far as the eye could see, there existed a hidden kingdom beneath the waves. This kingdom, known as Aquaria, was a place of shimmering coral palaces, schools of glowing fish, and gardens of kelp that swayed like dancers in the currents. It was ruled by a wise and kind queen named Seraphina, who had long flowing hair the color of sea foam and eyes that sparkled like the deepest sapphires. Aquaria was a peaceful realm, hidden from the world above by a magical veil that kept it safe from harm. The merfolk who lived there were content, spending their days singing, exploring the ocean depths, and tending to the vibrant marine life. But despite the beauty and tranquility of their underwater home, Queen Seraphina often felt a deep longing in her heart. She had heard stories of the world above the waves, a world of golden sunlight, towering mountains, and vast green forests. She dreamed of one day seeing it for herself, but the laws of Aquaria forbade any merfolk from venturing beyond the veil. One day, as Queen Seraphina swam through the gardens of kelp, she noticed a young mermaid named Leora sitting alone on a rock, gazing up at the shimmering surface of the water. Leora was known for her curiosity and adventurous spirit, and Seraphina could see the same longing in her eyes that she often felt in her own heart. "What troubles you, Leora?" the queen asked gently, swimming closer. Leora sighed, her tail flicking nervously. "Your Majesty, I can't stop thinking about the world above. What if there's more to life than what we know here? What if we're missing something wonderful?" Seraphina's heart ached with understanding. "I've often wondered the same thing," she admitted, "but the veil protects us. It keeps us safe from the dangers of the unknown." "But what if the unknown isn't dangerous?" Leora pressed. What if it's beautiful? The queen hesitated, torn between her duty to protect her kingdom and her own yearning for adventure. Before she could respond, a sudden rumble shook the ocean floor, sending ripples through the water. The kelp swayed violently, and the fish darted away in fear. "What was that?" Leora asked, her eyes wide. Seraphina's expression grew serious. "I don't know, but we must find out." The two mermaids swam quickly to the heart of the kingdom, where the other merfolk had gathered in alarm. The once clear waters were now clouded with silt, and the coral palaces seemed to tremble. From the depths of the ocean emerged an ancient sea turtle, his shell covered in barnacles and his eyes filled with wisdom. "Your Majesty," the turtle said, his voice deep and gravelly, "a great danger approaches. The veil that protects Aquaria is weakening. If it falls, our kingdom will be exposed to the world above, and to the darkness that lurks within it." A murmur of fear spread through the crowd. Seraphina raised her hand, silencing them. "What can we do to strengthen the veil?" she asked. The turtle shook his head slowly. "The magic that sustains the veil comes from the heart of the ocean, a gem hidden deep within the abyssal trench. But the trench is guarded by a fearsome creature, and no one who has ventured there has ever returned." The merfolk exchanged worried glances. The abyssal trench was a place of legend, a dark and treacherous chasm that even the bravest of Aquaria's citizens avoided. But Seraphina knew that if they did nothing, their kingdom would be lost. "I will go," she declared, her voice steady. "I will retrieve the heart of the ocean and restore the veil." "Your Majesty, you can't!" Leora protested. "It's too dangerous. Let me go instead." Seraphina smiled gently at the young mermaid. "Your courage is admirable, Leora, but this is my duty as queen. I must protect our people." But Leora was determined. "Please, let me come with you. You shouldn't have to face this alone." After a moment's hesitation, Seraphina nodded. "Very well. We will go together." The two mermaids set off on their journey, leaving the safety of Aquaria behind. As they swam deeper into the ocean, the waters grew darker and colder, and the vibrant colors of the coral reefs gave way to shadows and silence. They passed through forests of towering seaweed and fields of bioluminescent jellyfish, their glowing bodies lighting the way. Finally, they reached the edge of the abyssal trench. The chasm was vast and seemingly bottomless, its depths shrouded in darkness. Seraphina and Leora exchanged a nervous glance before diving into the trench, their hearts pounding with fear. As they descended, the pressure grew intense, and the water seemed to press in on them from all sides. Strange creatures with glowing eyes and sharp teeth darted past, but the mermaids pressed on, determined to reach the heart of the ocean. At last, they arrived at the bottom of the trench, where a massive cavern loomed before them. Inside, they saw the heart of the ocean, a glowing gem the size of a boulder, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. But guarding the gem was a monstrous creature, a leviathan with scales as black as night and eyes that burned like fire. The creature roared, its voice shaking the walls of the cavern. Seraphina and Leora froze, their fear threatening to overwhelm them. But then, Seraphina remembered the stories she had heard of the world above, the sunlight, the mountains, the forests. She thought of her people, who depended on her to save their home. "We must be brave," she whispered to Leora, "for Aquaria." With a deep breath, the two mermaids swam forward, their voices rising in a haunting melody. The Leviathan hesitated, its fiery eyes narrowing as it listened to their song. The music filled the cavern, echoing off the walls and weaving a spell of calm and peace. Slowly, the creature's rage subsided, and it sank to the ocean floor, its massive body curling around the heart of the ocean. Serafina and Leora approached cautiously, their hearts racing. With a final, trembling note, they reached out and touched the gem. A burst of light filled the cavern, and the mermaids felt a surge of energy course through them. The heart of the ocean had accepted them, and its magic was now theirs to wield. As they swam back to Aquaria, the waters around them grew clearer and brighter, and the veil began to repair itself. By the time they returned to the kingdom, the ocean was calm once more, and the merfolk cheered with joy and relief. Queen Serafina placed the heart of the ocean in the center of the coral palace, its light shining like a beacon of hope. "We have faced the darkness and emerged victorious," she declared. "But let us not forget the lessons we have learned. The world beyond the veil may be unknown, but it is not to be feared. It is a place of wonder and beauty, just as our home is." From that day on, the merfolk of Aquaria lived in harmony with the ocean and the world above, their hearts filled with courage and curiosity. And though they remained hidden beneath the waves, they knew that they were part of something greater, a world of endless possibilities, waiting to be explored. And so, the hidden kingdom beneath the waves thrived, a testament to the power of bravery, unity, and the enduring magic of the ocean. The Kingdom of Vanishing Footsteps. Long ago, hidden beyond mist-covered valleys and forests of whispering trees, there was a kingdom unlike any other. It had golden towers that shimmered in the morning sun, and streets paved with smooth, pale stone. But what made it truly strange was that no footprints ever remained. No matter how many people walked its streets, merchants in flowing robes, children chasing each other, even the king himself, every footprint vanished the moment it was made. No dust settled, no tracks lingered. It was as if the kingdom itself refused to hold memories of those who passed through. Legends whispered that the land had once been cursed. Some claimed an old king had angered the spirits of the earth. Others believed the kingdom was a dream, not meant to exist at all. But one thing was certain: no one could ever leave a mark upon this place. One day, a traveler arrived at the kingdom's gates. Her name was Ilara, a wanderer who had spent years searching for forgotten lands. She had heard of the Kingdom of Vanishing Footsteps and wished to solve its mystery. As she stepped past the towering gates, she watched her own footprints dissolve into nothing. The sight made her shiver, but she pressed on, moving through the market square where people bustled about, their laughter and voices filling the air. Yet despite the life around her, there was something wrong. She noticed how the people walked as if they were never really there, like ghosts in a dream. They smiled, they spoke, but their eyes held no past. She asked a fruit seller where he had grown up, but he blinked in confusion, unable to remember. A seamstress sewing fine silk paused, looking distant when asked about her childhood. No one could recall where they had come from. Ilara's heart pounded. This wasn't just a place without footprints. It was a place without memories. Determined, she made her way to the grand palace at the heart of the kingdom. Inside, she found an elderly man seated upon the throne, his robes heavy with gold and jewels. The King of Vanishing Footsteps. "You seek the truth," he said, before she could even speak. His voice was tired, filled with sorrow. "But there is nothing to find." Ilara stepped closer. Why does this kingdom forget? Why do your people have no past?" The king closed his eyes. "Long ago, I wished for my kingdom to remain eternal, untouched by time. I was granted my wish, but at a cost. Time does not pass here. Footsteps do not stay, and neither do memories." Elara's breath caught. "Then, your people? They live, but they do not truly exist. They forget their yesterdays before the sun has set. No child remembers being born. No lover recalls their first embrace. Every day is the first day they have ever lived, over and over again." Elara's stomach twisted. A world without time, without change. Was that truly living? "Can it be undone?" she asked. The king's weary gaze settled on her. "Would you undo eternity, traveler?" Elara hesitated. The kingdom was beautiful, a perfect, unchanging dream. And yet, something in her rebelled against the thought of being forgotten. She stepped back, then turned and ran. As she crossed the gates, the ground beneath her shifted, and she felt something impossible. The earth remembering her presence. A single footprint remained behind her. And then, for the first time in centuries, the kingdom began to remember. The Lantern and the Forgotten Path. Deep in the heart of Eldenwood, where the trees whispered secrets and the air smelled of damp earth and ancient magic, there was a path that no one walked anymore. Old maps still marked it, but travelers claimed it led to nowhere, just an endless stretch of mist and shadows. No one remembered where it once led, and over time it was simply forgotten. Except by Mira. Mira had grown up in the village at the forest's edge, raised on stories of lost roads and hidden worlds. While others feared the unknown, she felt drawn to it. She would trace the faded lines of the path on old maps, dreaming of where it might lead. So when she discovered a strange lantern buried beneath the roots of an oak tree, its glass unbroken, its metal untouched by rust, she knew it was meant for her. That night, as the village slept, curiosity won. She took the lantern to the edge of the woods, struck flint to its wick, and watched as a pale blue flame flickered to life. The light cast long shadows, stretching like grasping hands, and when she turned back to the forgotten path, it was no longer forgotten. The narrow trail, once barely visible, blazed before her, lined with golden autumn leaves that had not been there moments before. The trees stood taller, their trunks twisted and ancient, their branches arching like cathedral ceilings. The air shimmered as though filled with unseen magic. The lantern pulsed in her hand, its glow guiding her. Then came the whispers, soft at first, like wind through reeds, then clearer, voices calling her name. "Mira!" She stepped carefully, her heart pounding. The path wound through the trees, the mist shifting like something alive. And then, just ahead, she saw a bridge of woven vines arching over a dark, still river. Beyond it, a village flickered into view, houses built into trees, their windows glowing with warm candlelight. People moved through the streets, their clothes shimmering like woven moonlight. They saw her, and they gasped. "She carries the lantern," someone whispered. An elder stepped forward, his face lined with age, but his eyes bright. "You have returned." Mira clutched the lantern. "I don't understand." The elder's voice was gentle. "This is the lantern of passage. Long ago, it guided travelers between our world and yours until it was lost. Without it, the path faded. We became forgotten." He bowed his head. "But you have remembered. A shiver ran through Mira. Had this place always been here, hidden just beyond the mist, waiting for someone to find it again? The elder reached out, resting a hand on the lantern, and warmth rushed through her. In that moment, she saw visions of what once was, a time when villagers from both sides walked freely between worlds, sharing stories, songs, and wisdom. A time before the mist, a time before forgetting. Mira lifted the lantern higher, and across the river, the mist began to clear. The path, once lost, was no longer forgotten, and neither was the village. A decision rested in her heart. Would she return home and tell others of this place? Or would she stay, a keeper of the path, ensuring it was never lost again? The lantern's glow reflected in her eyes, and deep down she knew this was only the beginning, the end. The Lantern Keeper's Last Wish. In the quiet town of Everdawn, wishes were not made with words, nor thrown upon stars. Instead, they were placed inside lanterns on the night of a child's birth, sealed within glass and flame, bound by hope and magic. These lanterns, glowing like fallen stars, were kept in the Tower of Lights, a grand structure with crystal windows and silver spires that stretched toward the sky. Each lantern held a dream. Some flickered softly, uncertain but alive. Others burned bright, eager and fierce. And some, dim and weak, clung to their last ember, waiting for a wish that would never come true. At the heart of the tower stood the Lantern Keeper, an old man with silvered hair and eyes that reflected the glow of 1,000 dreams. He never left the tower, never spoke a word, and most had forgotten he existed at all. His only task was to tend the lanterns, ensuring each wish had its chance to shine. But not all wishes were equal, and Leora's wish had never glowed at all. For as long as she could remember, her lantern had sat upon the lowest shelf, cold and lifeless. She had tried everything, whispering her dreams to it, holding it beneath the moonlight, even brushing it with stardust from the town's festival. Yet, no matter what she did, it remained dark. And so, on the eve of her 12th birthday, Leora did something no one had dared before. She climbed the tower. Through winding staircases and halls filled with the quiet hum of flickering lanterns, she made her way to the very top. The air smelled of candle wax and old parchment, thick with the warmth of countless burning wishes. There, among the sea of floating lights, she found him, the Lantern Keeper, his robes like twilight, his fingers tracing the delicate glass of a single lantern. But this one was different. It trembled, flickered, dimmed. It was his own. Leora gasped as she stepped closer. "Why is your lantern fading?" The keeper turned slowly, his ancient eyes filled with something strange. Not sorrow, not regret, but quiet acceptance. "Because I never made a wish," he murmured. Leora frowned. "But everyone has a wish." A sad smile crossed his lips. "Not the ones who tend them." For centuries, he had watched over the dreams of others. He had spent his days ensuring their wishes had a chance to shine, but had never dared to make one of his own. And now, as his time neared its end, his lantern flickered, hollow and weak, a wish never spoken, never given the chance to be. Leora's heart ached. It wasn't fair. A man who had spent his life keeping the dreams of others alive shouldn't be left without one of his own. And then she realized, perhaps it wasn't too late. She turned toward the rows of glowing lanterns, each holding a future yet to unfold, a dream waiting to be fulfilled. Then, slowly, she reached out and picked up her own. A lantern that had never burned. A wish never made. She turned back to the old man, holding it out to him with trembling hands. "If you never made a wish," she whispered, "then take mine." For the first time in centuries, the lantern keeper hesitated. His weathered fingers brushed against the cold glass of her lantern, and as he touched it, a spark ignited within. A flicker, a glow, and then a burst of golden light. Leora gasped as the lantern, once lifeless, flared with warmth, its glow spreading to the old man's hands, his robe, his very being. His eyes widened as the light filled him, surrounding him in an ethereal glow, lifting the weight of years from his shoulders. And then he smiled. For the first time, the lantern keeper had been given a wish, a gift, a dream, a second chance. The next morning, when the people of Everdawn awoke, they found the Tower of Lights burning brighter than ever before. The lanterns shone with a renewed brilliance, as if every wish within had been rekindled. But the lantern keeper was gone. In his place stood Leora, a girl whose wish had finally been made and fulfilled. She had taken his place, not as a keeper of lanterns, but as a keeper of dreams. And high above, where the morning sky met the lingering twilight, a single new star burned brighter than all the rest. A lantern that had been given. A wish that had finally come true. The Mirror That Lied. In the grand halls of the Ivory Palace, where marble pillars gleamed and chandeliers dripped with crystal, there hung a mirror unlike any other. It was framed in silver vines, its glass polished so perfectly that no flaw could be seen. And yet, the truth was far from its reflection. The mirror lied. It did not show the world as it was, but as the viewer wished it to be. A tired queen saw herself young again. A cruel prince saw a noble ruler. A thief saw an honest man. And because the mirror's reflection was beautiful, no one ever questioned its truth. For years, the royal family relied upon it. The king sought its wisdom before war. Courtiers admired themselves before its glass. And in time, the people of the kingdom believed in its illusions more than reality itself. Then came Elena, a servant girl with no fine silks or golden rings, only a sharp mind and a heart that longed for truth. One evening, while dusting the mirror, she caught a glimpse of herself. But what she saw was not her own reflection. Instead of her freckled face and plain dress, the mirror showed a princess, draped in silks, a crown resting atop her head. Elena laughed at the absurdity. "You lie," she whispered to the glass. The mirror, silent for so long, whispered back, "I only tell the truth you wish to see." A shiver crawled down Elena's spine. She had seen how the royal family depended on the mirror's words, how they clung to its lies. If the mirror only spoke what people wished to believe, then the kingdom was built upon falsehoods. That night, as the palace slept, Elena returned to the mirror with a candle in hand. "What happens if someone refuses to believe you?" she asked. The glass shimmered, its silver frame quivering. The mirror had no answer. No one had ever dared question its visions before. Elena took a deep breath and placed her hand upon the cool glass, and for the first time, the mirror cracked. A single jagged line split its perfect surface. Then, the world around her shifted. The polished marble floors turned dull and cracked. The grand tapestries were worn and moth-eaten. The chandelier, once brilliant, was missing half its crystals. And the king, standing in the doorway, was not the mighty ruler he had always believed himself to be. His robes were frayed, his crown crooked, his face lined with age and worry. The spell of the mirror had broken. The kingdom had not been prosperous. It had been rotting beneath the weight of its own deception. And now, without its illusions, the truth could no longer be ignored. The palace awoke in chaos. Courtiers cried out in horror as they saw themselves not as grand and powerful, but as ordinary, flawed people. The prince, once arrogant and proud, looked upon his reflection and saw a coward. The queen, once beautiful and young, wept at the face she had long denied. The king turned to Elena, his voice a desperate whisper. "What have you done?" Elena stood tall. "I have only shown you what was already there." The people of the palace, though shaken, knew she was right. They had lived in a world of comfortable lies, but now they had a choice: to rebuild with truth or cling to the remnants of illusion. And so, with the mirror's power broken, the kingdom changed. The king ruled with honesty. The prince learned humility. And Elena, the servant girl who had dared to question, became the kingdom's wisest advisor. The mirror remained in the palace, its surface forever cracked. And though it no longer spoke, it held a lesson for all who dared look into it. A lie, no matter how beautiful, can never replace the truth. The Painter of Impossible Worlds. In a quiet village, nestled between rolling hills, there lived a young artist named Leora. Unlike the other painters who captured landscapes or portraits, Leora painted things that did not exist. Floating cities made of glass, staircases that led into the sky, oceans that shimmered with the colors of dawn. The villagers admired her talent, but whispered behind her back. "She paints nonsense," they would say. "Dreams and illusions. Nothing real." But Leora did not mind. Her heart longed for something beyond what the eye could see. One evening, as she worked by candlelight, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find an old man in a cloak woven with silver threads. His eyes gleamed like the stars. "Your gift is rare, child," he said, "and it is needed. The world is crumbling, and only you can paint it anew." Before she could ask what he meant, he handed her a brush unlike any she had seen before. Its handle carved from moonstone, its bristles shimmering like liquid silver. The moment she touched it, a rush of power coursed through her fingertips. "Paint, and you will see," the man whispered, before vanishing into the night. Leora hesitated, but dipped the brush into her paints. With a single stroke, the air before her shimmered and shifted, and suddenly she stood inside her painting. The walls of her small cottage had vanished, replaced by an endless golden field beneath a sky swirling with galaxies. She gasped. The world she had painted was real. Excitement surged through her. If she could step into her art, could she also create? She lifted the brush again and painted a bridge of floating stones. And as she stepped onto it, the stones solidified beneath her feet. She painted a river that flowed upside down, and its waters rippled overhead like a mirror. "I can make anything," she breathed. But then she noticed something unsettling. The edges of the world were fading. Colors bled into nothingness, as if being erased by an unseen hand. Fear crept in. "The world is crumbling," the old man had said. She turned and saw a great darkness spreading from the horizon, swallowing everything in its path. The impossible world she had created was vanishing. "No!" she cried, gripping her brush. She painted walls of fire, shields of light, mountains that touched the heavens, but the darkness consumed them all. It was not something she could fight. It was something she had to replace. With newfound resolve, she knelt and began to paint, not defenses, but an entirely new world. A world where the sky sang, where dreams built cities, where the impossible was possible. The darkness halted, hesitating at the edges of her masterpiece. Then, bit by bit, it began to recede. When the final stroke was placed, the world was whole again. Leora stood amidst her creation, breathless. She had done it. The old man appeared once more, a proud smile on his face. "You understand now," he said. "You are not just a painter. You are a creator." From that day on, Leora did not paint for admiration, nor for the whispers of the villagers. She painted to build, to heal, to bring life to the impossible. And somewhere, in a place unseen, her brush still moves, shaping worlds beyond imagination. The Phoenix and the Forgotten Flame. In a land where winters never ended, and the sky was forever pale, the last ember of warmth flickered in an ancient temple at the heart of the frozen world. Legends spoke of a time when fire danced freely, when the land knew the touch of spring, and when the Phoenix, the guardian of warmth, soared across the heavens. But centuries had passed, and the Phoenix had vanished, leaving behind only the forgotten flame, an ember hidden in the temple's depths. Nira, a young girl with frost-bitten fingers and fire in her heart, had spent her life searching for warmth. While others accepted the eternal winter, she refused. When she learned of the legend, she set off toward the temple, braving howling winds and endless snowdrifts. After days of travel, she reached the temple's frozen steps, its towering doors covered in ice so thick they looked like glass. She pressed her hands against them, whispering, "I seek the Phoenix." The doors groaned open, revealing a vast hall of marble and shadow. At its center stood a pedestal, and on it, nothing but a faintly glowing ember, no larger than a firefly. Her heart sank. Could this tiny spark truly bring warmth back to the world? A voice, ancient and tired, echoed through the chamber. "Who dares disturb the last ember?" Nira turned to see an old man, his robes tattered, his eyes flickering like dying coals. "The Phoenix entrusted me with the flame," he said, "but its power fades. The world has forgotten fire. The ember cannot grow unless someone remembers what warmth truly is." Nira hesitated, then knelt beside the ember. She cupped her hands around it, shielding it from the cold. "I remember," she whispered. "Warmth is a mother's embrace. It's laughter shared between friends. It's the first light of dawn after a long, dark night." The ember pulsed, glowing brighter. The old man's gaze softened. "Then you are the one." With a shaking hand, he reached into his cloak and pulled out a delicate feather, red and gold, shimmering with the memory of fire. He placed it in Nira's hands. "The Phoenix cannot be reborn without its flame. Take this ember to the highest peak and release it to the sky." Nira nodded and left the temple, shielding the ember beneath her cloak. She climbed for days, the cold biting at her limbs, the wind howling warnings. But she pressed on, step after step, until she reached the mountain's peak. The sky above was a dull gray, heavy with centuries of forgotten warmth. Nira knelt and held out the ember. "Return to us," she pleaded, releasing the glowing spark into the wind. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air crackled. The ember expanded, swirling into a spiral of flame, growing brighter, wilder. The sky blazed gold and crimson as a cry shattered the silence, a cry of rebirth. From the storm of fire, wings unfurled, vast and brilliant. The phoenix rose, its feathers shimmering like molten gold, its eyes burning with the light of 1,000 forgotten summers. Heat swept through the land, melting the snow, chasing away the cold. Rivers ran free, trees stretched toward the sun, and flowers bloomed where ice had once ruled. The phoenix circled once, then soared toward Nira. It landed before her, lowering its head. "Because you remembered, the world remembers too." As its warmth wrapped around her, Nira felt the ice in her veins melt, replaced with something new, something eternal. Hope. And with that, the phoenix took to the skies, leaving behind a world that would never forget warmth again. The river that sang at midnight. In the valley of Eldermere, where the hills rolled like sleeping giants, there flowed a river unlike any other. By day, it was a quiet stream, its waters clear and cool. But at the stroke of midnight, it sang. No one knew why. Some believed it was the voice of a lost enchantress. Others thought the stars themselves had given it music. But the villagers never dared to disturb it. They only listened from afar, lulled into dreams by its melody. All except for Mara. Mara had always wanted to hear the river's song up close, to understand the secret woven into its tune. So one moonlit night, while the village slept, she followed the water's edge, her bare feet cool against the grass. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, the sky endless and dark. Then, as the church bell tolled 12, the first note rose from the water. It was not a song of words or instruments, but something ancient, something alive. It curled around Mara like a whispered lullaby, wrapping itself through the night air like silver thread. The melody was sorrow and longing, hope and heartbreak, a story only the river knew. Mara knelt at the edge, breathless. The sound seemed to seep into her bones, and as she gazed into the water, something shifted. A face appeared. Not her own. Mara gasped, stumbling back, but the face remained. A woman with long, flowing silver hair and pale, sorrowful eyes. "You can hear it," the woman murmured, her voice entwined with the melody. Mara swallowed hard. "Who are you?" The woman's reflection flickered like candlelight. "Once, I was called Selene. I was a singer in a great king's court. But a jealous sorcerer cursed my final song, binding my soul to these waters. Now, I sing for eternity, but no one listens." Mara's heart ached. "But I can hear you." Selene's eyes brightened. "Then you may be the one to set me free." The river's song grew stronger, magic thickening in the air. A strange understanding filled Mara's mind. This was a song that needed an answer. She took a deep breath and began to sing. At first, her voice wavered, uncertain, but as she listened to the river, she found the melody woven between its currents. The water carried her voice, entwining it with its own, the two becoming one. The sound grew richer, fuller, a harmony of two souls entwined. The air trembled, the water shimmered, and then silence. The river stilled, the wind exhaled. Mara opened her eyes. Selene's reflection was gone, but beside her, where mist had been moments before, stood a woman, real, breathing, her silver hair glowing in the moonlight. Celine. Tears filled her pale eyes, and when she smiled, it was like the first light of dawn. Thank you. Mara let out a breathless laugh. I didn't even know if it would work. Celine knelt, running her fingers through the water. No song rose to meet her touch. The curse was broken. Mara sat beside her. It was a beautiful song. Celine nodded. And now, it is a story. For the first time in centuries, the Midnight River did not sing. It slept. The Witch Who Bottled Moonlight. Deep within the Evernight woods, where the trees whispered secrets and the rivers glowed silver under the moon, there lived a witch named Lyriel. She was no wicked hag, nor a weaver of curses. Instead, she worked with quiet magic, collecting the light of the moon and bottling it in delicate glass vials. The people of the nearby villages feared her at first, as they did all witches. But when a child fell ill, Lyriel offered a single drop of moonlight to chase away the fever. When crops withered under a cruel drought, she sprinkled silver light over the fields, and rain soon followed. Slowly, the villagers learned. Lyriel's magic was a gift, not a curse, but not everyone believed in kindness. One evening, as Lyriel walked through the woods, she sensed a shadow following her, a presence filled with hunger and greed. Lord Vareth, a noble from the south, had come with his men. He had heard whispers of the witch who bottled the moon, and saw only power waiting to be taken. Under the light of the full moon, Vareth stepped from the trees. His dark cloak billowed like a storm cloud, and his sharp eyes gleamed with ambition. "Witch," he called, his voice smooth as polished steel, "I have come to bargain." Lyriel did not stop filling her bottles. The moonlight streamed down, caught in her glass like liquid silver. "I do not bargain with men who bring swords instead of words," she said. Vareth's lips curled into a smile. He raised his hand, and his soldiers stepped forward, their blades gleaming. "You mistake me, my lady. I do not ask. You will give me your bottled moonlight, or I will take it myself." Lyriel sighed, looking up at the great silver moon above. It had watched over her for years, had whispered its magic into her hands. She had never used her power for war, never turned her gifts into weapons, but she would not let greed steal what belonged to the night. With a single whispered word, she shattered every bottle at her feet. The moonlight within erupted, rising like mist, weaving through the trees like glowing ribbons. The air hummed with magic, and the silver light wrapped around the soldiers, binding them in place. They gasped, struggling, but the moonlight held them gentle yet unbreakable, like the tides obeying the pull of the moon. Vareth snarled. "What have you done?" Lyriel stepped forward, her voice like the wind through the trees. "Moonlight is not meant to be owned, my lord. It is meant to be free." The silver glow pulsed, and in the next breath, Vareth and his men vanished, scattered into 1,000 motes of light that drifted toward the sky. Perhaps they would return as stardust, perhaps as nothing at all. The forest fell silent. Lyriel stood alone once more, the last of the moonlight fading into the night. The bottles at her feet were broken, but she did not mourn them. The moon would rise again, and she would bottle its light as she always had. But never again would she let anyone believe it could be stolen. And so, whenever the full moon shone brightest over Evernight woods, the villagers would watch in wonder as tiny silver lights danced between the trees. A reminder that magic, like the moon itself, belongs only to those who respect it. The Star Weaver and the Forgotten Sky. In the village of Noctis, the night sky had been empty for as long as anyone could remember. No stars, no moon, only an endless stretch of blackness that swallowed the world in silence. Children grew up believing that the sky had always been this way, and their parents had long stopped speaking of the stars. Stories about them faded, and soon they were nothing more than myths. But far beyond the village, hidden deep in the hills, stood an abandoned tower where an old woman lived. No one knew she was there, for she never ventured into the village, and the villagers dared not go near the tower. Rumors whispered that it was cursed, that shadows lurked behind its crumbling stone walls. One cold evening, a girl named Elara wandered too far from home. The wind howled around her as she stumbled upon the lonely tower, its windows flickering with the faintest golden light. Drawn by curiosity, she pushed the heavy wooden door open and stepped inside. At the very top of the tower, she found the old woman seated before a great loom, her fingers dancing over golden threads. The fabric shimmered as it wove itself into intricate swirling patterns, but when Elara looked closer, she gasped. Tiny, glowing pinpricks of light, shaped like constellations, were woven into the cloth. "What are you making?" Elara asked in awe. "The stars," the woman replied, her voice as soft as the wind. Elara frowned. "Stars don't exist." The woman stopped weaving and turned to look at her with knowing eyes. "Not anymore. But once they filled the sky, watching over us, guiding travelers, telling stories." Her fingers brushed the cloth. "They were lost when people forgot them. But I have been weaving, waiting for someone who still believes." Elara hesitated. The village elders always said stories were dangerous. They filled your head with things that weren't real. But something inside her stirred, a quiet longing, as though a part of her had been missing without her even knowing. She stepped forward. "How do we bring them back?" A slow smile spread across the old woman's face. "We weave," Elara learned quickly. The golden thread hummed beneath her fingers, warm and alive. Each night, she and the old woman worked tirelessly, spinning the lost stars back into existence. As they wove, Elara began to remember. Faint, flickering memories of a sky that had once glowed with stories. She remembered the way the stars had whispered in the dark, how they had once made the night feel safe. Finally, one evening, the old woman let out a breath and stopped her work. "It is done," she said, "but there is one final step." She reached into her robes and pulled out a needle made of silver moonlight. It was cold in Elara's hand, yet it pulsed with power. "You must stitch the sky back together," the woman said. Elara climbed to the highest window of the tower, the golden tapestry draped over her arms. The wind roared around her, but she did not waver. She took the silver needle and, stitch by stitch, sewed the stars back into the night. With the final stitch, the sky ignited. 1,000 tiny lights flared into existence, scattering across the heavens in a breathtaking dance of gold and silver. The village below gasped as the night transformed before their eyes, the darkness giving way to a brilliant, shimmering sky. For the first time in centuries, the stars had returned. Elara turned back, excitement in her chest, but the old woman was gone. The loom stood still. The golden threads lay untouched, as though no one had ever sat there at all. And yet, Elara knew the truth. From that night forward, the stars remained, casting their quiet glow over Noctis. Though no one could remember why they had disappeared in the first place, they knew one thing for certain. Stories were not meant to be forgotten, and neither was the sky. The rose that bloomed in the dark. In a kingdom where the sun had not risen for 100 years, where the sky stretched in endless twilight, and the streets were lit only by flickering lanterns, there was a garden unlike any other. It belonged to Lord Adric, a man who had lived in solitude for so long that even the servants in his grand estate spoke of him in hushed voices. His manor sat at the very edge of the abyss, a vast chasm that had swallowed the sun long ago, leaving the world in perpetual dusk. The garden that surrounded his home was once a place of beauty, filled with flowers that drank in the moonlight. But now it was barren. The once proud hedges had wilted, the fountains stood dry, and the roses, his mother's favorite, had long since crumbled to dust. And yet, one fateful night, something stirred beneath the soil. A single bud, small and fragile, pushed its way through the cracks of the lifeless ground. Its petals, dark as ink, shimmered with a faint silver glow, as if kissed by the stars themselves. It was unlike anything that had ever grown in this world without sunlight. When Eadric discovered it the next morning, he stopped in his tracks. His breath caught in his throat. He knelt, brushing his fingers over the delicate petals, half expecting them to vanish like a trick of the light. But they were real. Word of the impossible flower spread through the kingdom like wildfire. People who had long accepted the endless night as their fate whispered of miracles, of magic. Some claimed the flower was a blessing from forgotten gods. Others that it had been planted by the spirits of the abyss itself. Among those drawn to the garden was a young woman named Elira, a healer's apprentice from the village beyond the hills. Unlike the others, she did not reach out to touch the flower, nor did she demand answers from Adric. Instead, she knelt beside it, observing it with quiet reverence. "This flower," she murmured, "it doesn't grow despite the darkness. It grows because of it." Adric frowned. "What do you mean?" She smiled softly, tracing the edge of a petal without disturbing it. "Some flowers need the sun, others need the night. This one, it belongs to both. It has taken the sorrow of this place and turned it into something beautiful." Adric had spent years believing that darkness brought only loss, that nothing good could come from it. But now, staring at this impossible bloom, listening to Elira's words, he felt something shift within him, something he had not felt in a very long time. Hope. The people of the kingdom continued to visit, drawn to the flower as if it held a secret they had long forgotten. And then, to their astonishment, more buds began to appear. Not just one, but dozens. The garden that had stood lifeless for so many years slowly came back to life, each new bloom glowing softly in the eternal night. For the first time in an age, the gates of Adric's manor were no longer shut. The once lonely man now walked among his guests, speaking to them not as a shadow of the past, but as someone who had found beauty in what he once feared. The darkness had not taken everything from him. It had given him something too. And so, the garden of Lord Adric became a place of quiet wonder, a place where roses bloomed in the night, their petals whispering a single truth. Not all things that grow in the dark are meant to wither. Some are meant to shine. The end. The Clockmaker's Secret. In the heart of a fog-draped village, where time never seemed to stand still, there lived an old clockmaker named Aldrich. His shop, tucked between two leaning buildings, was filled with ticking gears, spinning cogs, and golden timepieces that never ran a second too fast or too slow. But the villagers whispered about Aldrich, not just for his craftsmanship, but for something stranger. His clocks never needed winding. His shop smelled faintly of ozone, as if a storm had passed through. And, most curiously of all, Aldrich never aged. One winter's evening, a young girl named Elora ventured into his shop. She was small, with sharp eyes and clever hands, and she had noticed something peculiar. Aldrich always locked his workshop door at precisely midnight. "I want to learn," she said, brushing snow from her sleeves. "Teach me." Aldrich studied her for a long time before finally nodding. "Very well, but you must never, ever touch the silver clock." For months, Elora worked beside him, learning how to mend pocket watches and carve wooden cuckoos. But always, her eyes drifted to the silver clock mounted on the far wall. Unlike the others, it had no hands, only a single, unmoving gear in its center. One night, when Aldrich had fallen asleep in his chair, Elora's curiosity overcame her. She crept to the silver clock and reached out, her fingers brushing the cool metal. The moment she touched it, the shop shuddered. The air thickened, turning heavy and still. The sound of ticking stopped. A door appeared where there had been none. A thin crack of golden light gleamed through it. Heart-pounding, Elora pushed it open. Inside was not a room, but an endless void, filled with floating gears, twisting ribbons of glowing numbers, and threads of time itself, unspooling like strands of silver silk. At the center stood another Aldrich, but this one was young, barely older than she was. He turned, startled, and his face was a mirror of the old clockmaker's, only without the years of wear. "You weren't supposed to see this," he whispered. Elora gasped. "You're young." He nodded. "Because I am a prisoner of time." The real Aldrich stole a moment, his own future, and locked me away to live endlessly while he remained outside, unchanged. He gestured to the silver clock. "It is a cage. If you turn the gear, time will resume, and I will grow old, but he will vanish." Elora hesitated. The shop beyond the door flickered, reality wavering as if time itself was waiting for her choice. Then she reached out and turned the gear. A deep chime rang through the shop. The old Aldrich, still slumped in his chair, faded into dust, carried away by an invisible wind. The young Aldrich stumbled forward, gasping as his body aged before her eyes. His hair silvered, his hands wrinkled, his breath caught in his chest, until, at last, he became exactly as she had known him. But his eyes, once tired and distant, were now filled with something new: relief. The clocks in the shop began to tick again. Aldrich exhaled, steadying himself. Then, with a tired smile, he turned to Elora. "I suppose I owe you an apprenticeship, a proper one this time." And from that night on, the clockmaker's secret belonged to them both. The Fox Who Traded His Tail. In the heart of the ever-wild forest, where the trees whispered secrets and the rivers sang, lived a fox named Riven. He was clever, perhaps too clever for his own good. His fur was as red as autumn leaves, and his tail was the longest and most magnificent of all the forest creatures. But Riven was not satisfied. He wanted more speed, more strength, more cunning. And so, when he heard of the mysterious peddler of trades, a being who granted gifts in exchange for something precious, he knew he had to find him. One moonless night, Riven followed the old legends to the hollow glade, where the shadows twisted and the air smelled of forgotten things. There, waiting beneath an ancient willow, stood the peddler. He was neither man nor beast, wrapped in a cloak stitched from moth wings, his face hidden beneath a hood. "You seek a trade," the peddler murmured, his voice like rustling leaves. "I do," Riven said boldly. "I want to be the fastest creature in the forest." The peddler's unseen eyes seemed to gleam. "And what will you give in return?" Riven flicked his magnificent tail. "This," the peddler tilted his head, "a fair trade. But beware, every bargain has a cost beyond the price." Without hesitation, Riven agreed. The peddler raised a gnarled hand, and in an instant, Riven's tail vanished. In its place, he felt a surge of power, a lightness in his limbs, a fire in his muscles. He leapt, and the world blurred around him. He was faster than the wind itself. At first, Riven reveled in his speed. No hunter could catch him, no prey could escape. He became a legend among the animals. But soon, he noticed something strange. The wind no longer played with his fur. The rustling of the leaves no longer felt like whispers meant for him. The forest, once his home, seemed distant, as if it no longer recognized him. And then came the worst part. Without his tail, the foxes no longer welcomed him. They turned their backs, whispering that he was unnatural, that he had given away something that made him one of them. Alone and outcast, Riven realized the truth. He had gained speed, but lost belonging. Desperate, he returned to the hollow glade, but the peddler was gone. The willow stood silent, its branches heavy with secrets it would never tell. For the first time, Riven could not run from his mistake. From that day forward, the animals spoke of the fox who had no tail, a cautionary tale of greed and regret, whispered in the rustling leaves and sung by the rivers. And somewhere, deep in the Everwild, a lonely, tailless fox still runs, searching for something he can never truly get back.